All right, so we will get started and we're going to pick up part 2 where we left off kind of yesterday, which is the legal issues that are triggered when we're setting up a virtual summit. So you will very often hear me saying every business decision has a legal impact. We'd like them to be positive, and that's absolutely true. Every time we're making a decision in business, it has a legal implication and doesn't mean it's a negative one. It can be an incredibly positive one, which is why I position myself always at the front end of the planning and the proactive nature, because I really don't enjoy cleanup issues. They're not fun, but anything you're doing is going to trigger legal. So this is what we were working through yesterday. So in part 1, we went through the virtual summit. Tracy, thank you for asking me to define what it is, because really most often it's our lead magnet, but it's not just our content. It is collaborative with lots of other people. Well, imagine if I give my content to you. I want to make sure that you're not misusing it. I want to make sure that you don't take it. I want to make sure you're not sharing content that you, as a host, I want to make sure that you're sharing your own content and not content that you stole from someone else who then finds out you stole their content, passed it off as your own, put it in my summit. So that's kind of where we're going to start legal. So when we're talking about legal, the main issue is this right here. We're using other people's content. It is their stuff. It's their intellectual property. It's their branding. All of those pieces, we have to be careful. You want to protect yourself. You want to protect your guests. You want to make sure that you're not inadvertently, again, scaling a massive amount of mess. And I will say, over the years that I've been involved with virtual summits, behind the scenes with virtual summits, there is less theft than there used to be. Back in 2012, 13, 14, 15, to some extent, there was more theft of intellectual property. And there were people that would plagiarize. Plagiarism is not a new thing. It's been going on since the beginning of time. But as business becomes cutting edge, and oh, look at that, we can have a virtual summit. Oh, look, I can be an expert. Well, if I go and rip off someone else's content and then I show up and present it as my own, I've now plagiarized, but you may not have known it as the host. So I will say the theft has gone down in recent years. It is still there, but more than the theft issue, which used to be a far bigger issue, like it was definitely on a front burner in terms of people passing off stuff as their own when it wasn't their own. Now it's really protecting the content of the people that are involved. And I will go through, I'll show you an example of a guest contributor contract, which you obviously tailor based on what the nature of the relationship is. That's where I absolutely love, and you'll see I geek out over the law, because the law to me is no different than interior design. And so just like if I was designing a living room, I get to choose where to put the couch. And the couch, like right in front of your front door, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you go, you know what? I don't have to throw out the couch. I just move it to a different area. And you're trying to pick out, like, okay, do I really want to put that obnoxious plaid that I absolutely love on my $5,000 sofa? Or would I rather pick a neutral for the sofa and then just put a flamboyant pillow? So that is what the law truly does. The law, just like Kajabi, when you know the building blocks, it allows you to arrange it to accomplish exactly what it is that you do. So when you're taking care of your guests, you're addressing legal, you honestly will position yourself as such a professional, because I have yet to be invited to a summit where the host initiates the legal issues. Most of the time it's me saying, oh, now by the way, do you have this, and this? So I end up helping them, which is no problem, but it's a very easy way. If you're watching this, if you're in, the realm where you're, learning from me, you will immediately elevate yourself as a professional, because they'll be like, oh my gosh, she just sent me a guest contributor contract. Like, oh, I hadn't even thought of this. So let's just run through it, overview quickly, and then we'll get to an actual contract, because I think that'll help it make a little bit more sense. You want to make sure you're identifying what legal entities are involved. So when I'm hosting a summit, who's the legal entity that is responsible for the summit? You have to identify this. Who's the legal party that's hosting, and who are the other legal entities involved? So if I'm the host, it's the legal entity that I pay my taxes under, however I have that set up, and the legal relationship between me and the speakers. So it's saying, yep, the legal relationship is the host of this and the speakers. You're also identifying what's the scope of the involvement. When they're giving you their content, you're thinking about the time. How long can I distribute this content? Some people don't care. Some people absolutely care. You need to lay out these expectations up front. Which we'll get a little more when we get, stuff really starts to come up when you're dealing with expectations. So if you're giving them the expectation that they're going to provide you deliverables, what are they providing? When is it coming? How are they getting it to you? What's their availability? When are they going to be available? How long are they going to be available? All of those specifics, which again, when you're laying out your summit, you will know the answers to all of these. Marketing. What are your expectations? Are you marketing the summit, or do you expect them to do some marketing for the summit? Cancellations. If they have to cancel, life happens. There were cancellations before pandemics. One thing that definitely came up quite often in the online business realm when I first came on the scene in 2011 was you had all of these women, myself included, that said, yep, I'm leaving corporate, I'm coming home because guess what? I'm having babies. So summits are typically planned 6 months to a year ahead of time. Well, what happens when one of your key speakers goes into labor, has her baby? Like, all these things you have to think through. That one, not quite as much right now, but I think it's just because of the people I'm probably running around with. We all have like kids now versus 8 years ago, we were all having the babies. But it definitely came into play in two different situations where someone that they had chosen to be an anchor had her baby early. And so they were scrambling for like, oh my goodness, what do we do? And now that she canceled, but you just think through these things. If you are selling it, like if you're using the summit as part of your intro offer or your New York City, some people will call this, a freemium or a premium product. It's no different. It's an intro offer if it's a low cost. It's New York City if it's higher cost. But if you're doing a money share, meaning you want them to promote it, if someone purchases through their link, they get a portion of that. You have to think through how much of what, where are these numbers coming from? A huge mistake that business owners make is they're like, oh, I'm giving 50%. Okay, 50% of what? If it is 50% of the purchase price, then identify that. If it is 50% after the cost of expenses, identify that. So know what numbers are we talking about, because suddenly, if it's 50% of the purchase price and once you take out expenses, you might realize you're making a whole lot less than you thought you were making. So you just need to be thinking through these issues. When are they going to get paid? What's the timeline for being paid? How are they going to get paid? Very easy is to just send payments out via PayPal. Are there exceptions? Refunds, all of that stuff. You just think it through. Also, what can cancel the contract. So K in the legal world is just an abbreviation for contract. So it says this K, I realize, is contract terminations. What cancels it? What could cancel the virtual summit? Prior to the current, situation and the pandemic, there are so many contracts that are now having massive issues. They were in-person events. They didn't have the necessary clauses that allowed something to cancel and refunds to be made, exceptions to be made in something like a pandemic situation where it has fancy legal terminology. You don't have to worry about that, but you need to think through, what is my worst case scenario? In a lot of ways, that's all a contract is doing. It's saying, let's anticipate all the worst case scenarios. Let's lay out our expectations so that we're being very clear in our communications. And then, quite honestly, these contracts never get turned on, meaning we never have to argue about it because it was there to begin with. It laid out the expectations for the relationship. So a very well done, well thought out contract will just live in the shadows. It will never get turned on. It is your best insurance policy. And if something does come up, because usually there's a disagreement, there's a misunderstanding, when that does bubble up, it's easy to pull out the document and say, okay, what did we agree to? And that way, it guides the discussion and hopefully provides a calmer resolution. Contrary to what most people think, legal is not really everything you see on TV. A lot of it is pretty calm and quiet and happens behind the scenes. Any questions so far? There we go. All right, so let me show you. This is where, once you've thought through, like once you're going through the different steps, I know how the virtual summit is serving my North Pole to New York City, because that means I know what portion of it is a lead magnet, what portion is making money. I know who my speakers are. I know what my timeline is. I know the answers to these things. Then you use what's called a guest contributor agreement or a guest contributor contract. Because I know someone will ask me, yes, everyone in PBK has access to all of the legal documents, including how to use it, when to use it, all of that. So what I'm showing you is what you would see, like if you were using PBK or you have Bizzlebox. Some people buy it through Bizzlebox. But here, and we'll just walk through, parties, this is what I was mentioning. This is just identifying who the legal entities are that are involved. Yes, there's lots of magical legal language, but at its core, it's the basics that we just went through on the whiteboard image. You're laying out what constitutes acceptance. We don't live in a world where we're physically signing documents anymore. We're living in a world where someone says, yep, I'd like to be a speaker, and you start going back and forth on email. They're booking things on Acuity to schedule their interview. So you define what counts as, yes, I've accepted this relationship. You do need to know what that point in time is. So this is just saying, yep, this is what acceptance means. You're also laying out, what is the contribution terms? What am I giving you permission to get from me? How can you distribute it? We really, in this day and age, you have to have a non-exclusive worldwide right to distribute, because the minute you go online, it's worldwide. So it's not saying I own their content. It's saying I'm distributing it as a part of whatever's going on. So that, for many people, is something they're concerned about, especially if you're going to sell this long term. Like, okay, I'm taking my content, I'm putting it into your summit. What happens if a couple years down the road, that person turns out to be a complete dirtbag? And these things have happened. When someone turns out to be a total dirtbag, you don't want your content in their content anymore. You want to distance the relationship. Well, that's fine when it's an in-person event because you're like, yep, I'm just not speaking at your event anymore. But what if your content is in theirs? They are now a well-recognized dirtbag for whatever reason. You want your brand out of their brand. You have to have language that says, I can pull this out. Like, I reserve the right under these situations to pull my content away from yours. You definitely want to have that because relationships do change. And there are times when you just don't want to be associated with the dirtbag company. Happens. Make sure that's one of the things where we want to protect ourselves also. Let's say we had content and we had an agreement. Yep, you're in here, you get commissions from this, and you find out that someone's a dirtbag, then you don't want them associated with your brand. You want language that allows you to move things in and out. Okay, so payment, you definitely want to identify, are you paying your guests? Are you not paying your guests? Again, there's not a right and wrong. There are what is right for what you are setting up. There's a zillion ways that you can pay people. Intellectual property, what I like to explain it or teach it as, it's like a play date with my kids. You know, when they bring friends over and they're little, they might both have different trucks. And so when they come over and they're playing and one has a red truck and one has a blue truck, it's very easy to know that Tommy goes home with the blue truck and Tad's red truck stays here with me. That's very different if they say they both bring over a bag of Legos. Well, what happens when they start playing together and they mix the Legos? Unless we know that Tommy only brought over blue Legos and Tad only had red Legos, when those things mix, it becomes very hard to pull it apart. So when you're talking intellectual property, when you're in a group setting, it's just a way of saying, this is how we're going to say, you came in with your blue truck, you may leave with your blue truck, so that there's no misunderstanding about commingling content or stealing content and all that kind of things. Here's another key piece, and that has to do with representations. Yeah, didn't rip it off from someone else and are passing it off as your own, because I don't want someone to send me a nasty legal letter that says, hey, you ripped off our content. And I'm like, no, I didn't. I brought Susie in as an expert for blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, well, Susie, we're also suing Susie. You just want a way to remove yourself from these situations. There are people that lie and steal and are dirtbags, and we just want to make sure that none of it becomes an issue. So you just say it at the beginning and then it doesn't really become an issue. Confidentiality, that can mean a number of things, especially, people that have highly complex funnels and they want to keep that information private. You basically are just saying, if you learn things because you had a behind the scenes picture, vantage point, you don't get to share it. Controlling agreement, we are just saying, hey, this document is what guides the discussion, not the texts, not the emails, not the Facebook messages, not the Instagram messages, anything. It's in the law, we call it the four corners of the document. If it's not on this page, it doesn't get to come into the discussion. We don't want people pulling in stuff from other locations. Lawyers are, we're big on control. If it's not in this document, you don't get to talk about it. So that's what controlling agreement, will stand for. The entire agreement, again, if it's not on this paper, it doesn't count. This is another big one that most people completely flub up, and that is, where can you get sued? You want to specify that you can only be sued in your backyard. It's why anytime you buy a concert ticket or a cruise ticket or an airline ticket, on the back of it, it will say, one, it's probably controlled by binding arbitration, meaning you can't go through a normal court system process, and two, where the location is. So for cruise ships, most of them are in Florida, meaning I can't sue them in Michigan. They are not forced to defend themselves in Michigan. That is incredibly important, not just in your guest contributors, but in your purchase terms for your contracts. You want to have these things. So that is a very standard, very basic, good starting point for a guest contributor contract. Questions? No?
One of the things that I'm thinking about as a speaker is, I don't think I really have that much in-depth, legalities that perhaps I should have on my side. I've mostly been going by what the event planner sends me, and I just sign off on it. And I'm thinking, like, maybe I don't really know if I'm fully covered, but that could be a different topic. Um, as the speaker, when you're doing it from a speaker and you're coming in under somebody else's organization, and you don't really know what I don't really know what I should be looking for on my end. If I'm really actually agreeing to what they're sending me. I mean, I'm agreeing because I figure that's what they send everybody, and that's their SOP.
Yes. Most of them, if they're sending one, they're ahead of the game for sure, which is that's always a good, well, typically it's a good indicator. Sometimes it's because they went on Google and they just grabbed something and they have no idea what they are legally binding themselves and their guests to. But when you are a guest, what you want to make sure is that, one, I always say, I'm giving you permission. You may distribute this for, X amount of time. And I either do or don't expect payment, whatever the thing has been discussed. And it's been years. It's truly been, I set these up for other people, but I myself haven't been part or agreed to be part of a summit in quite a few years, because it honestly wasn't worth my time from the people that were setting it up. So when I'm setting them up for people and I'm setting it up for their guests, it's always coming at it from the perspective of, if the host becomes a dirtbag, the guests need to be able to remove their content, carte blanche. If the guest becomes a dirtbag, the host needs to be able to remove their content, carte blanche. So those are the two big ones, is really the dirtbag aspect, which has happened. I mean, you look at any brand that ends up with a PR issue, when somebody becomes the dirtbag for whatever reason, you want to be able to distance yourself. So when it's on the internet, it can otherwise live forever. And you're like, okay, I don't want my brand over here anymore. And it's not just take my content out. It's, if you've put my logo on your landing page, get it off. If my name is in an email, get it off. So it's laying out exactly what it means to pull me out of your stuff. Because that's a big thing. Your reputation is everything. So that's the big piece when you're a guest, is the ability to protect yourself, protect your content, protect your brand recognition, and having that, for sure, taken care of up front. The other piece is protecting your content, your intellectual property. This isn't as big of a deal as a lot of people think, but because most of the time they're just interviewing you. Most of the time you're not handing over all of your stuff. And even though we all have our unique interpretation of something, much of what we have is not going to rise to the level of a copyright infringement for a legal action. So it's just, you also just want to be sure that, hey, I'm distributing this content. It needs to, making sure someone's not passing it off as their own, which again, isn't that big of a deal because they're interviewing you. So you're there, you're talking, it's you doing a presentation. Obviously, it's harder to pass that off than if you just sent them a PowerPoint presentation on slides. So that one, you temper it with the practicality of, it's not typically a big deal. The bigger deal is the dirtbag. I'll just call it the dirtbag clause. Get my stuff out and distance myself from you if and when I ever need to. And then as a host, you definitely want the dirtbag clause, but you also don't want the liars, the plagiarizers, because if you're promoting them and they have plagiarized and stolen from someone else, then the person that they've stolen from, when they're working with their lawyer to get it shut down, you're going to get roped in. It's just like when I'm raising the boys. Your friends are going to do stupid stuff. You might even do a stupid thing or two in your lifetime. But if you see someone doing something that's, is going to get you in trouble, you get away from them as fast as humanly possible, because I don't want you looped in based on someone else's bad action. So does that help, Elise?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, those are the really the major legal issues that get triggered. Especially, if you're bringing money into play, the money becomes an issue. A lot of, depending on what it is, when you're dealing with the money portion, affiliate links don't always work. The cookie gets attached to somebody else. And so if you have quality speakers that you've vetted and you have relationships, it doesn't raise as many issues, but people, I've seen it happen. They're fighting over, a $5 affiliate purchase. Well, I clicked and I know this person used my link and they said they used my link, but it's not showing up on my dashboard. And you're like, what I don't have time. So you just have to be very clear. You have to say, look, my dashboard controls, end of discussion. Are things going to get messed up? Are cookie links going to get, double clicked in priority? Yes, they absolutely are. But we are not fighting over it. And whatever it says on my dashboard is what controls the day. And that's where I make payments from. So again, it has to do with what you're setting up, what are price points, what is the profit share. But as long as you're thinking it through at the get-go, planning for the worst case scenario, writing yourself out of it, then it really doesn't become an issue, so that you can focus on what the whole reason that we decided to do this summit to begin with. Any other issues that this is triggering for you? No? All righty, just a second. I'm going to wrap this one up.